have to introduce Howard. Howard is a good friend of mine, and he is, in my opinion, the authority on schools and school funding. So Howard served in Bloomfield Hills School District as a trustee for 10 years, correct, Howard?
Correct.
Yeah. And Howard offers this free class for wannabe legislators who want to understand more about school funding. And I took him up on that and attended one of those classes, and I can tell you it was an eye-opener. And what really drew my attention most is the talk about Proposal A of 1994. I'm a builder and a real estate broker, so I'm in the property real estate realm. And Howard was talking about Proposal A from the education side of things. And I thought this would be very interesting to talk about Proposal A from both sides and to talk about the unintended consequences that we are living through today with this tremendously devastating housing crisis that we are living in. So Howard, first, thank you so much for everything you do for us, wannabe legislators and legislators, educating us about school funding.
Absolutely.
So my side of the Proposal A equation is how property taxes are configured. And my understanding is that Proposal A came into being during the John Engler era. It was the fact that people were priced out of their homes because of property taxes. They were so high and they were increasing every year. So let me first explain how property taxes are calculated. So every city, every village, sometimes they rely on other entities like townships or the county. They have assessors. So they assess the value of each property. So they put a value on it that in their view is actual market value. And that is cut in half and it's called state equalized value. So if your house is worth $200,000 on the market, your state equalized value is going to be $100,000. And then every city has what is called a millage rate. So mill, if any one of you speaks Spanish or took some lessons, mill is 1,000. So it's a rate per 1,000. So if the millage rate is 50, so the 100,000 is state equalized value, you take the 100 times 50 and you get your taxes. So each year there is a new assessment that comes usually in January, February, and you always get that letter in the mail. And in that letter they'll tell you what the new assessment is. So cut in half is state equalized value. With the market increasing, that's the real estate market, the property market, people were being priced out of their homes. Their taxes were getting so high that they had to sell their homes and move because it was becoming too much. So something had to give. And they came out with this Proposal A that said, okay, if you live in your house as a principal residence, we're going to cap your taxes. So the first year you buy the house, your taxable value is the state equalized value. They created this other value that's called taxable value. So now we have state equalized value and taxable value. The year you buy the house, your taxable value, your state equalized value are going to be the same. Next year, your taxable value is going to be capped. So your taxable value is not going to increase like your state equalized value because the assessors are still assessing and the state equalized value is still going up with the market. Your taxable value is being capped and it cannot increase by more than 5% or inflation, whichever is lower. So 5 or less, while the state equalized value is increasing every year by what the market is increasing by. And as the years go by, you can see that the gap is getting larger and larger, larger and larger. And now you want to sell your house, you're giving up the low taxes, plus the new owner is going to be paying taxes here. So you can have neighbors side by side. The neighbor that's been in their house for a long time, they're paying, let's say, $4,000 in taxes. The person who bought the house last year is paying $8,000 in taxes. So this is one of the unintended consequences is people don't want to sell their homes anymore. And this is creating this huge housing crisis. Part of it is what's creating this huge housing crisis. So now, how did they manage to reduce housing taxes? It is by how they were funding schools. So now I'll let Howard talk about how that affected schools and how are schools funded in Michigan.
Thank you, Shadia. So what was happening in schools is the local school board would decide the millage that would actually fund the school itself. The schools were, so right now a municipality for police and fire, let's say, they pass millage. Well, schools were doing the same thing in that they were, the school board, and we have over 500 local school boards, they would pass the millage or vote on the millage, and then it would go to the taxpayers, and the taxpayers would vote on it. And if they approved it, that would be the amount of money that you would then have on your tax bill that Shadia was just talking about. Well, this caused huge inequality of different districts around the state, where your schools were then funded based upon your property values. So if you were in an area with high property values, schools were very well funded. If you were areas of the state, either urban or rural in particular, that had lower property values, the mills that could be passed were a lot lower, or at least would generate less money. But what precipitated the problem eventually, which caused in the 1990s to finally address both these issues, both being taxed out of your home on the property tax side and the school inequality side, was an area of the state called Kalkaska. Now, Kalkaska, using the old hand here, mitten, is way up on the upper left-hand corner here. So Kalkaska, in the superintendent of Kalkaska School, in February of 1993, as many, over 30 odd years ago, in February, wrote a letter to the parents saying, "Dear parents, we're out of money. We don't have enough money to pay the teachers come March 1st. We'll get more money when the property tax bills come in, or payments come in the summer, because property taxes come, either in the summer, in July, or in December. But we don't have any money. So we're going to shut down schools in Kalkaska School District. See you in September." Signed, Superintendent, Kalkaska School. Well, obviously, Lansing went crazy. They said, "This is no way to run a railroad. We can't do operations of school districts this way." What was happening is, so by looking at the different amount of money that the school districts were getting for areas in southeast Michigan, in particular places like Troy, Birmingham, Bloomfield, Northville, they were getting upwards of $9,000, $10,000 per student. In Kalkaska, they were getting an equivalent of around $3,000. Well, the cost of living in Kalkaska might be lower than southeast Michigan and Detroit, but it's not 1/3 the cost. You still have to pay teachers, you still have to pay for heating and lighting, you still have to pay for textbooks, etc. So Lansing saw both these issues, saw both the people getting priced out of their house, which had been a trend around the country for a decade or so, where people were saying, the rent's too high, I can't afford my home, it's TDM, too damn much. And the school issue. And the schools, obviously some of the millage that were causing the millages or the property tax to be too expensive was coming from the schools themselves, because your property taxes fund, or had funded, schools and parks and police and fire and other types of things like that. Lansing did, and so at that time John Engler was the governor as a Republican, and Debbie Stabenow was the majority leader in the Senate. Now, this is the Michigan Senate. This is before she ran for the U.S. House and eventually became a U.S. Senator and now is retired. But Debbie Stabenow was the Democrat, the top Democrat and the majority leader in the Senate of Michigan. So John Engler and Debbie Stabenow came together and said, okay, how can we fix this? And that generated Proposal A, which was the compromise to find out how do we solve both these issues, both people who can't afford being in their home anymore because the property values were rising greater than inflation, and the school district issue where there was huge inequality between the different districts around the state.
So that's a great explanation about what happened. And obviously, if we want to go into the details, we know that they did this taxable and state equalized value, which kind of capped taxes for people who live there as their principal residence, but they also increased the sales tax from 4% to 6%. They also increased tobacco.
They might have.
Yes, so
okay.
It's kind of equivalent to what they're doing today with increasing marijuana taxes. And this whole package was, we're not going back to the old way. You people of Michigan, you either pass Proposal A or we're going to do it legislatively.
So now, and to add on that, Michigan's Constitution that was written in 1963 for whatever reason, to me it doesn't make a lot of sense, but in the Constitution it says that the sales tax rate will be it had said 4% in the Constitution. So the legislature couldn't change it on their own. It had to be the people who would vote for that. So Proposal A, after the two sides, the Democrats and Republicans, figured out how could we come up with a solution, said, well, boy, so there are two ways to do this. If we lower property taxes, we want to do, how do we offset that so it's revenue neutral? There are two ways of doing it. You could raise the sales tax, or you could raise the income tax. The income tax can be changed, the rate of income tax can be changed by the legislature on their own, as long as you get Democrats and Republicans to agree in Lansing. But to raise the sales tax requires a constitutional amendment, which means it has to go on the ballot for in even years. Well, now it's 2026 or 2028, and back then it was 1994. So Proposal A was to raise the sales tax to offset the reduction of property taxes, and it went on the ballot. So the legislature came up with this arrangement that they said, okay, from now on, pass a law that it's illegal to use property taxes for funding operations of schools. As Shadia said, they burned the bridge. You couldn't go backwards. So you had two options, either Proposal A, which went to the voters to raise the sales tax from 4% to 6%, or, and if the legislature if the voters turned that down, the legislature would have then voted to increase your income tax, an equivalent amount to raise the same amount of revenue that incremental 2% from 4% to 6% would have raised. As it turns out, they didn't have to go that route. The people voted for Proposal A. The sales tax went from 4% to 6%, and on the school end, as Shadia said, now you had these two types of things on your property tax statement, both taxable value and state equalized value, SEV. It used to be just one number, now there were two. But for schools, it totally took the responsibility of raising revenue for funding the schools and to pay the teachers and the administrators and the upkeep of the buildings, took that responsibility away from the school board and gave it to Lansing. So now one of the major responsibilities of a local elected school board member, and there are over 5,000 in the state, is we have to be turned into advocates and lobbyists, going to Lansing and going to the Michigan House, the Michigan Senate, and the governor, and asking for funding, where it used to be the responsibility primarily of the local school board, as your city council or township board does right now for police and fire. That responsibility was taken away from the school board and given to the elected officials in Lansing.
So the question is, we tried to solve a problem, and it was a big problem. Mm-hmm. It needed a solution. What is the situation today? What are the unintended consequences, whether when it comes to housing and property values or when it comes to education? Mm-hmm. One thing that I didn't mention when I explained Proposal A is that it did create that taxable value and state equalized value, but it also created a difference between a principal homeowner mm-hmm. and an investment property. Mm-hmm. How is that? It gave a different millage rate to investment properties. So that difference is actually a millage that went to the schools, correct? Mm-hmm. And it's about more or less 30% in terms of actual money. So if you own this house as your home, as a principal residence, you will pay $4,000. If you own it as an investment, you're going to pay more.
Well, it's a little bit. So the way it's structured is when you own your home, you go into your treasurer's office and you fill out a form saying this is my homestead. It's called now principal residence.
Principal residence. They changed it, yeah.
Okay.
It was originally homestead. They changed it to principal residence.
So if the properties in the state or in the country that are not principal residence are businesses, apartment houses, second homes, vacation homes, rental homes, things like that. So And there's a millage of 18 mills that each school board needs to vote every 5 or 10 years to have their voters authorize this 18 mill millage to be assessed for non-principal resident property, which is all that laundry list I just gave you. So if you look at your property tax bill, if you're a homeowner, you will see the 18 mil millage, but with a zero, meaning you're not paying for it. But if you're and the way you actually see that, getting to the weeds a little bit, is there is a percentage on there, on the property tax statement, and if you're a principal homeowner, you'll see 100%. And if you're a business owner, either McDonald's or Costco or an apartment a landlord, you will see 0% there.
Talking about housing in particular, because this was one of the unintended consequences in my view. The original thought is like, okay, so we need to give you a break on your principal residence, but if you're an investor, you can pay more. But what is an investor doing with the house? If it's a second home, okay, I understand, but most of them are rental properties. And what did we do other than penalize renters? So if you're a homeowner, we're giving you a break. If you're a renter, you have to pay more. So we pushed rents up, and we pushed renters into this vicious cycle that they couldn't get out of because they're paying higher rents. Becoming a homeowner became really very difficult for so many people.
Okay. And on the school side, so they did Proposal A, and all as this change happened by taking the responsibility from this local school district and giving it to the state. The difference between Kalkaska and other school districts, that didn't change. Who actually paid the bills and who got the revenue changed drastically, but that differential stayed. And so this was in 1994, and every year the state legislature would nibble away at that gap and would make it less and less of a gap. And the way they did that is basically they constrained the top school districts in the state, and they gave more money to the lower funded school districts. So eventually it got to even, but it took until right after COVID, in 2021, look, almost 30 years later, that little by little they finally got it. So with some of the federal funding that we got from Washington, D.C. after COVID, they finally were able to close that gap so that this time all school districts per student get the exact same amount of money. And I won't go too far into this, but what Proposal A did is gave school districts equality. It took 30 years, but it got us to equality. So all school districts basically get the same amount of money per student. But equality is not equity. All students, when they walk in the schoolhouse door, some students come in are coming from economically disadvantaged homes. Some students have learning disabilities and are special education students. Some students don't know English as their primary language. So they need additional resources, additional funds to get them up to the same level as their counterparts who have home life, which is different than the home life that these students have. So what the move over the last 4 or 5 years in Lansing or really 7 or 8 years now, has been trying to bring equity to school funding over and above just the equality that Proposal A gave us from the 1990s. That finally, we saw the final result of that by, as I said, 30 odd years later. But that still was just solving the equality problem, not the equity problem.
So this is always the question that comes to my mind, is we're throwing money at problems, and we know that money is not everything. It is very important. Obviously, we need to pay our teachers, we need to pay for facilities. That's another problem because facilities are not covered by that.
And you're absolutely correct. So, Proposal A did not solve any for brick and mortar for any of this. That's still pre-Proposal A structure.
Yes, so that wasn't solved. But we still have schools that are not even average. We're having this race to the bottom when it comes to our schools. In my view, is one of the biggest problems in Michigan, because if we're going to have strong economy, if we're going to bring people to Michigan or our kids back to Michigan, we need to have strong education. And we have universities that are incredible. Why is our K through 12 going down? And you are the expert, so tell me.
You got another half hour or so?
The multi-million-dollar question.
So, first off, when I hear different people in politics say we're throwing money at the problem, well, we're spending money. The issue, in my view, is spending or money is necessary but not sufficient. You can't have a good education system if you starve it of fund, because the administration, the school boards, and the teachers don't have the resources, both in terms of staffing and also in terms of you need to compensate teachers who have master's degree at a salary that's comparable to what they can get in the outside world.
I'm sorry, but even that, we have teachers who are raising our future generation, and we're paying them so little. Look at other countries, like in Finland, they make more money than anybody else.
And it's not only pay and benefits, but also respect of the profession.
Exactly.
But to go to your point, though, so money is absolutely necessary, but it's not the only thing. You need, in my view, you need a vision. You need goals. You need expectations of what is that money to be spent for. And one of the things I see, in having been involved in this whole education and politics for over a decade now, is Democrats want more funding and Republicans want accountability. And both are right, but what are we spending the money on? What's the objective? Republicans, accountability. What are we holding ourselves accountable to? What's good? Where do we need to be? So that gets to really setting a vision, having a North Star in terms of this is where we want to be. And my view is that we need to say that we need to be world class in our education system, both in terms of being one of the best within the 50 United States, but also comparing ourselves to other countries around the world, because it's a global economy these days. So we need that goal setting and vision at the state level, and then what are called SMART goals, which say by this year we want to be here, okay? So that's where the state wants to be. We then need to get each school district, and there are over 800, including charter schools, which are each charter school is basically a separate district. So we now have about 800 school districts in the state, and they're all currently very autonomous. They all have a school board, and they all kind of operate independently without any coordination, school district to school district, or even with the state. So if we set ourselves up with a coherent system where all the elected officials, both in Lansing and the school boards, are all aligned, so that we set these goals for ourselves by 2035, 2040, whatever, we want to be here. And then we start developing strategies to actually, in the classroom, move us from where we are to where we need to be. And we're all pulling the oar in the same direction. We're actually going to start seeing movement. But right now, what I say is we got 800 cats running around doing their own thing with no coordination between school district to school district and school district to the state. Therefore, yes, you're spending money, but without any real vision or objective or expectation of where we want to be with that money being spent.
It is a very difficult problem to solve. And as a person who lived on 3 different continents, I lived in 4 different countries. I have seen how other countries work. I think the balance between local control and state control and federal control is really the key to solving this problem. You look at Michigan, like Michigan is equivalent to a country in Europe, right? So you take France, for example. How is France funding its school?
I'm not an expert of how each country does things.
There is that control.
Well, here, one example. So instead of France, let's even go closer. Canada, Ontario, right across the bridge. They've got a very strong provincial government, and they set these kind of objectives. They have local school boards, but the province actually sets some of the rules. You talk about control, and there's a lot of talk about local control, and whether it's the federal government, the state government, or at the local level. As you said, I was on a school board, and I say it's equivalent to the difference between what the school board's responsibility is and a superintendent. Most people don't, you have 7 local school board members and a superintendent. What responsibilities does a superintendent have versus a school board, who are the elected officials? Kind of the bumper sticker way of explaining it is school boards say what and superintendents say how. So the school board says, this is where we want to be as a school board. We'll give you the superintendent goals. You, the superintendent have the expertise, both the experience and the education to actually run a school district. We don't, we're just elected officials. But so we say where we want to be and you figure out how we get there. That same model could work with the state versus the local school district, where the state says, this is where we want to be. Local school district, we're not going to tell you how to do that. We just want you to get there. So you have control in terms of how to come up with the strategies and the initiatives to actually get us there. And the way that Rochester School District does it might be very different than the way Escanaba does it or Grand Rapids does it. That doesn't matter. As long as you get to the same objective, the same end,
yeah,
that's fine. So there's the local control. We're not going to dictate from Lansing how you do it, but we are going to say, yeah, but we need to make sure that the vast majority of third graders read by third grade, or that students, when they graduate, have the skills necessary for life and career when they reach 18 and they graduate 12th grade. Those are the objectives that we've got. How you do that at the local level, as long as you are able to reach those objectives, we're going to stay out of your way. If you're having issues and struggling with that as a local school district, we can set up what are called partnership models to help you with these kind of things. But really, it's going to be your responsibility, but we're here as coaches, both from the state level and also from what's called the ISD, the county level school district, to assist you if you are having problems. But so we can come in with resources to compare school district to school district, different methodologies and different training abilities and classes to assist both the school board, the superintendent, the principals, and the teachers to get from where they are right now to where the state would like to see them.
So you know that I grew up under dictatorship, so authoritarian regime. And when I went to school, it was a core curriculum, no choice, obviously, dictatorship, no choice. And I have, my kids went to school here, and I, as a mother, you follow up and help your kids. And I saw how many choices you have here in this country. And that was really a shocker for me. It's like, okay, so you're going to school, there is a core curriculum, but there are so many options. And I feel like it is going a little too far, because we have kids today that graduate that even don't have basic math skills, which in my view is very important for anything you do in life, right? I mean, you need to know basic math skills. So as a person who went to MIT, obviously you're a very smart individual who worked as a trustee in a very good school district, Bloomfield Hills. What do you think about this issue, the core curriculum and the choices, and the fact that we are graduating kids that either don't know how to write well or don't know basic math skills?
So the state has not made the kind of progress in math in terms of legislatively as we have, and I'll talk about a little bit on reading. So we all have heard all the surveys and everything that we're like 44th in reading in the country. And I think only about 40% of students are able to read at third grade level when they hit third grade. And it really is even worse than that if you do what's called disaggregate the data, and you split apart the students that are economically disadvantaged, students that are Black students or Hispanic students, etc. Those gaps become absolutely immense. There was a survey done about 2 or 3 years ago by MSU. There's a research group at MSU in the education school, and they surveyed all the different school districts in the state and said, what curriculum are you using in kindergarten through third grade? They found over 400 different sets of textbooks and curriculum. Each school district was kind of doing their own thing, working with or getting quotes from different vendors and different publishers, and we had over 400. So that was problem number one, that you're talking about so many choices, ridiculous number of choices. But the second is that there has been a debate for like 30 or 40 years in education over what is the best way to teach English language arts. Also, it's reading, writing, etc., is ELA, English language arts. And make a very, very long story short, there's something called the science of reading that is research-based, based upon the way human brains both think and work, and also how they grow as you go from, an infant all the way through, adulthood. And the science of reading is scientifically based, saying this is the best way to read or to teach reading and writing, which includes, not exclusively, but includes phonics. But a lot of those 400 curriculum that districts were using really had downplayed, if not excluded, phonics in the whole. There's a little graphic of a rope with different pieces of the rope all being intertwined and actually coming together with as a full cable. And phonics is one of those little feeders that goes into this whole rope that needs to be instructed. So with overall, so we've been doing every school district kind of has local control and makes their own choice, but the result wasn't working. It was very evident. So about 5 years ago, some legislators in Lansing started working with people that are advocates for children who have dyslexia, and saying not only are children not learning to read who don't have disabilities, but children with dyslexia are even more at risk. So they finally passed a bill after 5 years in October of 2024, so about a year and a half ago, that said by 2027-2028 school year, so in about a year and a half from now, all school districts must use a curriculum based upon this science of reading. And the Michigan Department of Education has come up with a list of the ones that.
So you take France, for example. How is France funding its school?
I'm not an expert of how each country does things.
But there is that control.
Well, here, one example. So instead of France, let's even go closer. Canada, Ontario, right across the bridge. They've got a very strong provincial government, and they set these kind of objectives. They have local school boards, but the province actually sets some of the rules. You talk about control, and there's a lot of talk about local control, and whether it's the federal government, the state government, or at the local level. As you said, I was on a school board, and I say it's equivalent to the difference between what the school board's responsibility is and a superintendent. Most people don't, you have 7 local school board members and a superintendent. What responsibilities does a superintendent have versus a school board, who are the elected officials? Kind of the bumper sticker way of explaining it is school boards say what and superintendents say how. So the school board says, this is where we want to be as a school board. We'll give you the superintendent goals. You, the superintendent, have the expertise, both the experience and the education to actually run a school district. We're just elected officials. But so we say where we want to be, and you figure out how we get there. That same model could work with the state versus the local school district, where the state says, this is where we want to be. Local school district, we're not going to tell you how to do that. We just want you to get there. So you have control in terms of how to come up with the strategies and the initiatives to actually get us there. And the way that Rochester School District does it might be very different than the way Escanaba does it, or Grand Rapids does it. That doesn't matter. As long as you get to the same objective, the same end, that's fine. So there's the local control. We're not going to dictate from Lansing how you do it, but we are going to say, but we need to make sure that the vast majority of third graders read by third grade, or that students, when they graduate, have the skills necessary for life and career when they reach 18 and they graduate 12th grade. Those are the objectives that we've got. How you do that at the local level, as long as you are able to reach those objectives, we're going to stay out of your way. If you're having issues and struggling with that as a local school district, we can set up what are called partnership models to help you with these kind of things. But really, it's going to be your responsibility, but we're here as coaches, both from the state level and also from what's called the ISD, the county level school district, to assist you if you are having problems. But so we can come in with resources to compare school district to school district, different methodologies, and different training abilities and classes to assist both the school board, the superintendent, the principals, and the teachers to get from where they are right now to where the state would like to see them.
So you know that I grew up under dictatorship, so authoritarian regime. And when I went to school, it was a core curriculum, no choice, obviously, dictatorship, no choice. And I have, my kids went to school here, and I, as a mother, you follow up and help your kids. And I saw how many choices you have here in this country. And that was really a shocker for me. It's like, okay, so you're going to school, there is a core curriculum, but there are so many options, and I feel like it is going a little too far, because we have kids today that graduate that even don't have basic math skills, which in my view is very important for anything you do in life, right? I mean, you need to know basic math skills. So as a person who went to MIT, obviously you're a very smart individual who worked as a trustee in a very good school district, Bloomfield Hills. What do you think about this issue, the core curriculum and the choices, and the fact that we are graduating kids that either don't know how to write well or don't know basic math skills?
So the state has not made the kind of progress in math in terms of legislatively as we have, and I'll talk about a little bit on reading. So we all have heard all the surveys and everything that we're like 44th in reading in the country. And I think only about 40% of students are able to read at third grade level when they hit third grade. And it really is even worse than that if you do what's called disaggregate the data, and you split apart the students that are economically disadvantaged, students that are Black students or Hispanic students, etc. Those gaps become absolutely immense. There was a survey done about 2 or 3 years ago by MSU. There's a research group at MSU in the education school, and they surveyed all the different school districts in the state and said, what curriculum are you using in kindergarten through third grade? They found over 400 different sets of textbooks and curriculum. Each school district was kind of doing their own thing, working with or getting quotes from different vendors and different publishers, and we had over 400. So that was problem number one, that you're talking about so many choices. We have ridiculous number of choices. But the second is that there has been a debate for like 30 or 40 years in education over what is the best way to teach English language arts. Also, it's reading, writing, etc., is ELA, English language arts. And make a very, very long story short, there's something called the science of reading that is research-based, based upon the way human brains both think and work, and also how they grow as you go from an infant all the way through adulthood. And the science of reading is scientifically based, saying this is the best way to read or to teach reading and writing, which includes, not exclusively, but includes phonics. But a lot of those 400 curriculum that districts were using really had downplayed, if not excluded, phonics in the whole. There's a little graphic of a rope with different pieces of the rope all being intertwined and actually coming together with as a full cable. And phonics is one of those little feeders that goes into this whole rope that needs to be instructed. So with overall, so we've been doing every school district kind of has local control and makes their own choice, but the result wasn't working. It was very evident. So about 5 years ago, some legislators in Lansing started working with people that are advocates for children who have dyslexia, and saying not only are children not learning to read who don't have disabilities, but children with dyslexia are even more at risk. So they finally passed a bill after 5 years in October of 2024, so about a year and a half ago, that said by 2027, 2028 school year, so in about a year and a half from now, all school districts must use a curriculum based upon this science of reading. And the Michigan Department of Education has come up with a list of the ones that, because they, over about a 6-month period of time, they vetted all these different curriculum from all these different publishers around the country and came up with, I think, 10 or 12 of them that check the box. They published that list in December of 2025, so about 3 or 4 months ago.
How is it working?
Along with not only the curriculum, but also the assessment process that school districts use to assess, to determine, Johnny or Sally, are you getting what I'm trying to teach? Where are you? And it helps the teacher fine-tune their instructions, not just for the whole classroom, but student to student. So they passed, so the Michigan Department of Education came up with a list of both assessments and curriculum, and it's right now, over the next year and a half, the school districts are actually purchasing those different assessment tools and curriculum, and then training both their teachers and administrators on it, so that by no later than September of 2027, actually in the classroom, kindergarten through 3rd grade, and I think even up to 5th grade, these new curriculum are going to be taught and then assessed to determine whether the students are understanding what they're being taught, so that by the time they hit 3rd grade, hopefully things work out. Now that's, it takes a while. I mean, you got to, the old, ocean liner or aircraft carrier trying to move us from where we are to where we need to be. And also, these are in place for 2027, but if you're a kindergartner in 2027 school year, you're not going to hit 3rd grade until 3 or 4 years later. So it's going to take, unfortunately, a number of years to actually see the result. But this is the way that other states have done it, and everyone talks about Mississippi as kind of an example.
Yeah.
So what we need to do, but it took them, they got on this path back 15 years ago. We just kind of figured it all out in Michigan. We're a little slow here. We finally figured it out in 2024. So it's going to take a while to sort of work its way through, to get the new curriculum, to get the new assessments, to get the training in place, to get the students then to be given it over a number of years. But we're on the path to get there. So, to what you said originally, or a few minutes ago, this is where local control didn't work, and the evidence was there. So there's a balance that we need to do between too much. We've swung too much, in my view, from the local control on extreme, everyone does their own thing, to one size fits all, which doesn't work either. You need to balance the two to see where's the right, medium point between having the elected officials of the local school district, make the decisions, but at the same time, making sure that as a state, we actually accomplish the goals that we're setting for ourselves.
And we don't really have to reinvent the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
We can just look at so many different experiences out there, whether in the state, in other states, or whether worldwide.
In the other countries.
Yeah.
And if you're, both Shadia and I are business people, and businesses, you benchmark. You look for who is world class, and you try to emulate them. Now, at the same time, I was in the auto industry back in the 1980s when everyone was looking to Japan. And, if Japan's doing it, then we have to do the same thing. Well, in any benchmarking, you look at other countries or other states, but you have to customize it. You can't just carbon copy it in, because different states and different countries have different cultures and different histories. So you have to you can't be in a cocoon and just don't look anywhere else and just look at yourself. You have to look at other places, but at the same time, you can't just take it and just transplant it directly, and just cut and paste into it. You have to take it, look at it, and tweak it and Michiganize it for us to make it fit within our culture and our history.
But also I was thinking when you were talking about the Department of Education. So I have a message for the federal government. The Department of Education is really important and necessary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because what departments of education do is not only implement legislation, but also they're the research arm. They can do analysis of different states and different countries and see what works, and then provide that data to the local school districts and the states, who don't have the time and the resources to do all that research, number one. And also the federal government in particular, they administer nationwide tests. So in in Michigan, we have a standardized test called MSTEP. There's two other tests that are available or that have been developed. One called NAEP and one called PISA. NAEP does the same thing as MSTEP, but nationwide. MSTEP is just for Michigan. It compares school district to school district using the same testing criteria, so you can look and see the difference between Alpena's school district and Grand Rapids school district. If you're a parent and looking with real estate, what's the most important thing? When you're buying a house, you talk about school district. So parents need tools to be able to compare school district to school district. But then how do you compare state to state? Well, NAEP is administered by the U.S. Department of Education to have every 2 years, every state has to take this NAEP test, or school districts, a statistical sample within the state, to compare Michigan to Massachusetts to Tennessee to Mississippi. But then PISA, I think it's PISA, is an international test. So it compares the United States to Sweden, to Japan, to China, to Great Britain. So between these three sets of tests, MSTEP, PISA, NAEP, and PISA, you're able to have these comparators so you can then see the results of how are we doing versus other countries and other states, and then you can delve in through research and then say, well, why is that happening? So the test will tell you what. It doesn't tell you why those answers are there or how you do that. Yeah. And you need researchers, both in the departments of education and in the universities, to then analyze all that stuff and be able to say, therefore, here are the winning strategies you need to put in place and the goals, so that you can then implement those based on your culture to actually accomplish the objectives you set.
I'm going to talk about reading as a mother. When, I have two boys, and I research what, like every new mother, you're reading all these books and researching and what's the best thing for your kids. And I read about the Montessori system and how this Maria Montessori, who was a pediatrician, an Italian pediatrician, she established the fact that a child's brain is a sponge, and it starts from the day you were born. And then when we get our kids into school at 7 years old, first grade, their brain's already slowing down. So if you start teaching kids from, really very early on, you will get incredible results. And I saw that in my kids. Both my kids went to Montessori, and both of them started reading at 3 years old. And when I tell people, they say, oh, your kids are smart. No, it's not my kids are smart. My son was in a class of 34 kids. 33 of them were reading at 3 years old. So it's not about my child and his level of intelligence. It's the method that's being used. So we have something that's tried and proven to give us results that we need. So then we go back to the fact that we don't have preschool. We are not actually investing in preschool for our kids in Michigan. And this is the Montessori system, that we have to start so early with kids to give them this advanced level as they move on with their education.
Now we are way off of Proposal A.
Yes, yes.
But it's a good segue from Proposal A, which is a funding piece, but you can now see that funding is one piece, one leg of a stool of actually making the education system work. To your point in terms of starting early. In Michigan, you do not have to enroll in school at all as a parent or enroll your child. And we have a very strong homeschooling environment in Michigan, so that there is no tracking system of a child through their formative years. If a parent doesn't want to enroll a student or a child in school, either in public school or even in private school, they can homeschool. Perfectly legal. That being said, if you enroll your child in public school, they must go to first grade through 12th grade. And that's where you get truancy officers and things like that. Kindergarten in this state is optional. That's just the way it's been. There have been bills going through Lansing to make that mandatory, but so far it's still optional. And that's, so you have local control. Think about this. Local control is not just federal, state, school district. Parent is local control. And if a parent doesn't want their child to be going to public school, they have every right to say no. But right now, so kindergarten is optional. Until about 8 or 10 years ago, I think the state only funded half-day kindergarten, not even full day. That state law got changed, so now if you enroll your student in kindergarten, they get the same funding as if they're going to first grade. But our education system is has lots of silos. You got universities in their silo, K-12 in their silo, and preschool in their silo. And what you're talking about is we're trying to break down those walls between preschool and K-12, and it's not just preschool, because preschool is just for 4-year-olds. And it used to be that there's something called Head Start, and which is a federal program, and in Michigan you have GSRP, Great Start Readiness Program, which about 10 years ago or so was just for students of low-income parents. Mm-hmm. But over the last 3 or 4 years, they've been raising the level of income, so, with the goal of having universal pre-K, so that you don't have to, if you have a 4-year-old, you as a parent do not have to pay tuition. That is state funded. And they're wanting to now expand that even further, and they're prototyping it right now, beta testing it for 3-year-olds. And different states, and I think New York City and New Mexico, are setting up state-funded daycare, which is from 0 to 3, as you were talking about in Montessori. So the biggest variable for determining success in K-12 is having high-quality preschool.
That is so true. That is so true.
But when it was parental pay for 4-year-olds, 3-year-olds, people couldn't afford it. And then you go to 0 to 3, age from birth to 3 years old, and it's daycare. Parents can't afford to pay, $10, $15, $20,000 for a preschool, for a daycare, because it's taking them. Not only is a good preschool or a daycare program good for the student, for the child, but it also frees the parent to go into the workforce.
Yeah, it's economically important for the state.
But that's a newish concept in the United States in terms of allowing parents to be able to send their children to either daycare or preschool and not have to pull out of their pocket and have to fund it out of their salaries. So this is, it does mean higher costs coming out of your state capital or the federal government, which means taxes. But if you spread that cost amongst all adults, not just the parents who have the children, but parents that are empty nesters or never had children, that it's a real benefit for society to have that, to help, as you said, to help economic development of the state or the country, and in Michigan in particular, to grow our population.
It all boils down to education.
Mm-hmm.
It really all boils down to education. So, and it's not about, I hear this all the time, like, I don't have kids, why do I have to pay for schools? Well, I don't drive on this road, but I still have to pay for it, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a society thing. It's not a direct personal benefit. Mm-hmm. It's an indirect benefit to all of us as a society.
It's an indirect, and also, I think most of us actually did go to school at some point.
Yeah, you would hope, yeah.
So, it's similar type of thing of, Social Security or Medicare, things like that, where you paid into it early, or you either, it's kind of the reverse of Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, where Medicare and Social Security, you pay into it at the beginning of your life, and then you use it at the end. In education, you used it at the beginning, and you pay for it over the end. And also you're spreading it amongst all the population, as opposed to focusing it just on the people, because the price tag then becomes astronomical. It's it's the same kind of thing like insurance, that yes, you're paying for either car insurance or homeowners insurance, but you're paying for it, you're not getting the benefit today, but at some point you very possibly will get the benefit.
You're not going to go bankrupt because of a car accident.
Yeah.
So there was one thing also we didn't mention in Proposal A, is
Sure.
that it created this transfer tax for real estate.
Okay.
So when you sold your house,
Mm-hmm.
you had to pay 0.75%
Mm-hmm.
of the price to the state, and then you also pay to the county. So the total transfer tax is 0.86%, which is, less than 1%, the price of the house upon selling the house. So it added to the transaction cost of real estate. All these things that are kind of putting a damper
Mhm.
on selling real estate and
Mhm.
moving. So it's also a very important thing. But going again to homes and where you live, shelter is considered a basic need.
Mhm.
So we don't tax food because it's a basic need. And I've always thought about this. It's like, why are we taxing shelter? Is there a different way of getting the revenue without pushing people into being unhoused?
So now we're getting way outside of just proposal A, but I won't obviously delve too deeply into this tax policy, but there are many different levers that your elected officials have, whether it's for paying for government, whether local or state or federal government. You have income taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, tariffs, as we now are seeing. All of these levers are out there for many of the legislators. And without going into any of the pros and cons of it, this is why elections are so important. This is why these kind of issues are what you should be asking people who are campaigning now in Michigan. Michigan in particular, 2026 is an incredibly important year. Not only do we don't have a president up for election, but we have a U.S. Senator with an open seat. We have the entire Michigan House, the entire Michigan Senate, the governor, the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, and in education, 2 of the 8 members of the State Board of Education. The State Board of Education, amongst a number of responsibilities, they appoint the state superintendent, who is in charge of the Michigan Department of Education, kind of circling back to education.
Department of Education.
So these are the kind of things that you need to be in. Hopefully this webinar now, it will help inform you, and you can either contact Shadia or myself if you have additional questions that we didn't go into. But these are the kind of things, as an informed voter, you need to be asking your politicians as they're asking for your vote. And then second, these are the kind of things that you need to think about when you go into the ballot box or early voting in the different ways we can elect people for the August primary and the general election in November. I think it's November 3rd of 2020.
November
3rd
August 4th.
of 2020, when you're actually going to be choosing the elected officials. We're going to have the ability to change the kind of things that Shadia and I have been talking about.
So as a person, I'm an immigrant, obviously, and I look around and I see how in the richest country on earth, we have people who don't have a roof over their head.
Mm-hmm.
How is that acceptable? How is it acceptable that we have children that go hungry in the richest country in the world? Not acceptable to me.
That's true on the housing side, but also on the education side. Why should students or children of parents, we kind of joked a little bit about, what do you ask a real estate agent, what's the school district like? Why should that question even be relevant? Why shouldn't all school districts in the state of Michigan give high quality education? So that question should become irrelevant. Right now, unfortunately, it's an important question you should ask. But we need to have a world, like you're talking about, people with housing and not being, not discriminated, but not having economics get into their housing and taxes getting into their housing decision. We shouldn't have the school district be so important. Obviously, there are going to be differences between the Lions and the Trojans and the kind of school spirit type of thing, school district. But should there be that much of a difference in terms of the education quality and the outcomes you would get school district? They should be all world class. How can we move towards that objective?
We are concentrating poverty.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And we always say, well, education is the great equalizer.
Mm-hmm.
Public schools are the great equalizer. And the reality is they're not. They're not. Because some kids go to school in Detroit, which is right there, a few miles down.
Or unfortunately, from where we're sitting right now, Pontiac, a mile north. They don't have toilet paper. We're going to the basics. They have mold in the building. Their water has lead. We are taking
the people who need a lift and pushing them down.
So those are decisions that or actions that politicians can take to help remedy some of those situations. But politicians do what their voters elect them to do and ask them to do. So it goes, yes, the politicians are the actual people to implement a lot of these things, but it really is the voters to become informed on these issues so that they can then elect the right politicians and then hold those politicians accountable to accomplish the things you're talking.
Going back to the public good,
Mm-hmm.
it's when you lift up all our children, you're going to get a wider array of intelligence and abilities, and we are wasting a lot of abilities because we are not giving every kid a chance.
There are many people in this country, unfortunately from my view, that don't take that view and just care about me and what's good for me. I don't care about what's good for you or the state or the society, what's in it for number one. And that's the attitude that I think one of the major differences, I think, unfortunately, in the political party is that the different people see things differently. Some people just look at it through a lens of individual in my family as opposed to the society at large.
And that's fine. I mean, looking at my interest and benefits to my kids, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But there is that balance. Again, we go
It's a
back to
balance.
the balance.
Mm-hmm.
I can help my family and help society.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be
Either or. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So what else do we want to talk about? Yes, so I think we had a great conversation. I'm running for office just because I see all these problems that need to be solved, and I believe that I can contribute. This is not for me, a step up or a life goal. For me, this is a debt of gratitude that I have to pay back to this country as a person who grew up under dictatorship, who really had no voice. I lived in a country where most books were banned, organizing was banned, assembly was, and I come to this country. Not only can I vote, I can have my name on a ballot. This to me, and this is why I'm stepping up to run for office, because I want to give back to this community that welcomed me with open arms over 30 years ago. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shadia, for having me.
Howard, this was really an incredible conversation. I always love talking to you because you have so much knowledge, especially in education. That is really one of the most important issues that we're facing today.